The first warning sign was the sound of children laughing. Too many little feet hitting my front steps all at once. I opened the door and froze. There they all were. My entire toxic family standing on my porch like they owned the place. My younger brother Zach, his wife Madison, their 3 kids, and my parents Carla and Greg. All smiling. All uninvited. All acting like they belonged there. I hadn't given them my new address. No one in my family had ever been to this house. But there they were, and Madison had that smug look that told me exactly how they'd found me. She always had. Her ways? "Look at this place," my mother Carla said, pushing past me without permission. "Rachel, you've really done well for yourself." It didn't sound like praise. It sounded like she was taking inventory. My father Greg just nodded silently behind her, like always. Zach followed them inside without even looking at me. The kids immediately started running around, claiming rooms with their eyes. Madison stepped in last, bouncing her baby and staring me down. "It's just beautiful," she said with that fake sweet voice. "And so big, almost too much space for just one person, don't you think?" That's when I knew. This wasn't a visit. This was a plan. And somehow I was the only one who hadn't been told about it. See, this wasn't new behavior from my family, it just had never happened in my house before. Growing up, everything revolved around Zach. He was 3 years younger than me, but he was always louder, always messier, and always forgiven for everything. When he broke the TV remote by throwing it at my head, guess who got grounded? Me. For yelling about it. "You're too sensitive, Rachel," Mom would say. Dad would just stare out the window like he couldn't hear either of us. By age 11, I was doing laundry for the whole family. By 13, I was packing Zach's lunch every morning and setting his backpack by the door so he wouldn't forget it. If I didn't, Mom would scold me for not helping the family. Zach got a Nintendo for his 8th birthday. I got a grocery store cake and a card signed, "Love all of us." No individual names. He was the golden child, and they didn't even try to hide it. Mom loved introducing him to neighbors as our brilliant little athlete. I was just, "Rachel, she's quiet, into computers or something." When I brought home my first A in calculus, nobody noticed. When Zach scraped a C in biology, we went out for ice cream to celebrate his effort. The breaking point came when I was 15. Zach shoved me down the stairs. "Just playing," he claimed. I wore long sleeves for a week to hide the bruise on my shoulder. Mom made me promise not to tell Grandma at Thanksgiving. "We don't need drama," she said. "Not with your brother's future on the line." After that, I stopped asking for anything. No prom dress, no rides to study group. I learned to walk everywhere. The school library stayed open late, and the janitor would let me sit in the corner until my legs stopped aching from the long walk home. At 17, I'd had enough. The night I left, I didn't even pack a full bag, just a hoodie, some notebooks, and a phone charger. I had $200 in a coffee can and a bus schedule I'd printed at the library. Mom told me not to come back unless I had real direction. I was still in high school, but direction wasn't the problem. The problem was that I'd stopped being useful to them. I stayed on friends' couches for months, graduated on time. They didn't come to graduation. No call, no card. I told myself it was better that way. Clean cuts heal faster. After that, I never went back for holidays. No 4th of July barbecues, no Christmas stockings. If they noticed, they never said anything. Maybe they just liked it better with one less place at the table. Zach got married at 22. I wasn't invited. I only saw the photos posted online. Madison in white lace, Zach with his arm around her waist like he'd never done a wrong thing in his life. They had their first kid a year later, then another right after. By then, they'd moved into my parents' house because childcare was easier that way. Mom posted weekly photos, 3 generations under one roof. I wasn't in a single one. From then on, I became what they called me behind closed doors. The one who left, the one who doesn't understand family, the one who made her own bed, so let her lie in it. In spring 2020, the world shut down, and so did my life. My job was the first to go. I'd worked as a QA contractor for a software company. No severance, just a form email and a final paycheck that barely covered rent. My roommate lasted 2 weeks longer before packing up and heading back to her parents' place in Michigan. I didn't have that option. The condo we'd been renting was too expensive for me alone. I sold everything I had: furniture, monitors, even a full-length mirror I loved, just to make that last month's rent. Then I stopped sleeping inside. There wasn't much left to hold on to. What I did have was my beat-up silver Ford truck and a camper I'd bought secondhand 3 years earlier for $200 cash. I told myself I might go camping someday. I never did. Instead, I bolted that camper to my truck bed, swept out the dust, and made it livable. Barely. Foam mattress, one small fridge, and a plastic bin of clothes. I parked behind a strip mall on my first night. Streetlights kept blinking overhead. A group of teens skated by after midnight. One threw an empty can at my tailgate. I didn't sleep, just lay there with my palms flat against the inside wall, listening for footsteps. The next day, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. I told them the truth. Job gone, lease ended. I just needed a driveway to park in for a while. Mom didn't hesitate. "That's not going to work for us. We've got the kids here. It's too crowded." Then Zach got on the phone. "If you want to park here, you're going to pay rent." The number he named was almost double what nearby lots charged. I didn't argue. I just hung up. After that, it was parking lots, grocery stores, abandoned office parks, and side streets near the river. I found outlets behind laundromats to charge my batteries. Used solar when I could. Showered at the gym, or when that didn't work. Used the public sink at a 24-hour gas station. I kept my mail at a friend's apartment and ate cold canned soup more times than I care to remember. Once in July, the fridge failed overnight and ruined everything I had. When I finally found a warehouse job in a neighboring city, I offered to take night shifts. No commute. I lived in the back lot. The owner looked the other way. "You show up on time?" he said. "That's more than most." He let me use the water tap and a spare outlet by the generator. Even cleared out space so I could unhook the camper and drive the truck during the day. It wasn't comfort, but it was stability. After the year I'd had, that counted for everything. 2 brutal winters passed like that. I never told my parents where I was. Didn't send updates. Didn't ask them to care. And they didn't. 3 years later, everything changed. I'd saved every penny, worked double shifts, and sacrificed everything for one goal: buying my own house. When I finally got the keys, I posted just one photo, my hand holding those keys on the front porch steps. One word caption: home. I didn't give anyone the address. But 3 weeks later, as I was setting up my camper in the backyard, old habits die hard, I heard a knock, then another. Then the door opened without me answering it. They walked in like it was a Sunday open house. Mom first, carrying a Tupperware container. Madison next, surveying my kitchen like she was already planning where to hang photos. Zach followed, pointing at the ceilings and baseboards. The kids ran past him, already claiming rooms. Dad lingered by the front door like he wasn't sure how long they'd stay. "This is beautiful, Rachel," Mom said. "You really did well for someone on her own." Madison moved from room to room, commenting on everything. 3 bedrooms. That's so generous. Honestly, it's bigger than I expected. Almost more than one person would ever need. Zach was quieter, but his eyes never stopped moving. "Closer to my work than I thought," he said, like he was talking to himself. I stood in the hallway, back against the wall, watching them move through. My space like they already owned it, the conversation that changed everything. When Zach finally turned to me, his hands were in his pockets and his voice was too casual. "Got a minute?" The others stepped outside too quickly. Mom herding the kids, Madison still bouncing the baby, Dad looking at me once before turning away. I followed Zach into my kitchen. He leaned against my counter like it was his. "This place," he said, "it's really something, but you know it's too much, right?" He paused, looked at me, then kept going. "I mean, you've got the camper already. You know how to live light. And we've got the baby, plus another one on the way. This house is 15 minutes from my job." I didn't speak. So I was thinking, Maddie and I, the kids, we could move in here. Just until we get on our feet. You could set up the camper in the backyard again, like before. You're used to it. He smiled like it was a done deal. like it made perfect sense to everyone but me. And still, I said nothing. Because deep down, I'd always known they'd come. I just never thought they'd be this bold. The invasion. 3 days of silence passed after that kitchen conversation. They left that night with vague goodbyes and too many lingering glances. Then Friday came. I pulled into my driveway just after 6, takeout in the passenger seat, keys in hand. That's when I saw the moving truck backed up almost to my porch. Zach's van parked beside it. My front door was wide open. Boxes were stacked in my entryway. Children's toys scattered on my floor. I could hear my television from the street, some cartoon playing at full volume. Zach stepped out carrying a lamp like this was totally normal. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just nodded like I was the one who was late. Madison appeared behind. Him, holding the baby. She grinned that sick, sweet smile. "It's happening," she said cheerfully. "We're so glad you're letting us stay." She turned toward my living room before I could speak. I didn't go inside. I walked back to my truck, locked the doors, and called 911. While the phone rang, Madison came up to my window and tapped twice with her fingernail. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Just let it happen. It's better for the kids." Then, quieter, with a tilt of her head, "Your mom said it's okay, and you always listen to her, don't you?" The moment of truth. When the 911 operator answered, I gave my name, my address, and told them my house was being taken without my consent. When the officers arrived, Madison tried to charm them. Zach stayed inside, pretending to be busy assembling a crib. I walked the officers through what happened, showed my driver's license, the deed, and pointed out the broken front lock, its core drilled out, the old brass knob tossed on my porch, like trash. The drill they'd used was still sitting there, plugged into an extension cord. The officers knocked. Zach opened the door holding a stack of papers. "A lease," he said confidently. "We have a lease." I took it from him. My name was there. My signature, too. Except it wasn't mine. I held it next to my ID and let the officer see how the handwriting didn't match. The loops, the slant, even a misspelling in my middle name. I looked Zach dead in the eyes. "This is fraud." His mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, Madison's voice rose, trying to say something about doing it for the children, for the future, for family. That's when my parents showed up. Mom walked straight toward the police with perfect confidence. My daughter agreed to this. I didn't turn to her. I just handed the fake lease to the officer and said, loud enough for all of them to hear, "This isn't just a lie, it's a felony. And if one more person walks into this house like they own it, I'll press charges." The breakdown Madison broke first. She tore the lease in half, then into quarters, then into shreds, tossed the pieces like confetti onto my porch. The wind carried some into the yard. One of the officers told her to pick them up. Zach said nothing. Mom didn't cry this time. She just looked at me with her jaw clenched. "You're being cruel," she said. I looked back at her, steady. "No, I'm being clear." The officers asked them all to leave my property immediately. And for once they did. Quietly, with no more pleading. But I knew that wasn't the end. People like them never leave with the door closed. They leave it slightly ajar, waiting to come back. Christmas Eve. Revenge. Christmas Eve came with freezing rain and the smell of cinnamon from my aunt's homemade pie. I'd invited 10 people. Half were cousins I hadn't seen in years. The rest were my uncle, his wife, and 2 old college friends who drove from out of state. Some drove 3 hours just to be there. They brought folding chairs, homemade food, and music on scratched CDs. My Uncle Don had even burned a Ray Charles Christmas album. "No holiday feels right without it," he said. We laughed more than I'd expected. No one asked about my parents. No one mentioned Zach. They'd all seen my social media posts months earlier about what happened, and none of them questioned it. Around 8 p.m., the door opened. I hadn't invited them. I'd never even given them the time. But there they were. Mom first. Holding a tray of store-bought cookies like that made everything okay. Dad behind her, stiff and silent. Zach walked in with his hands raised like he came in peace. Madison followed. No baby this time, just makeup, perfume, and that permanent pout. They all said Merry Christmas, like it was still theirs to say. The music stopped. Chairs creaked. My cousin Lauren stood up slowly, arms crossed. Uncle Don looked at me, waiting. I didn't say anything. Then he turned to Mom. You weren't invited. Mom smiled that fake smile. We came to make amends. Don didn't move. No, you came to be seen. That's different. The confrontation that ended everything, the room stayed still. Madison tried to explain about the kids, about space, about not meaning to cause trouble. Her voice rose with each word until she was talking over herself. Then came the tears. She dropped into one of my chairs, hands covering her face, crying loud enough to wake the dead. She kept saying how unfair it was that a woman with 4 kids has to live in a crowded house while someone with none gets all this space. I stayed standing, arms at my sides. Madison looked up, tear-streaked and shaking. You don't even have a family, Rachel, and we do. Behind her, Zach stared at the carpet. Mom looked ready to defend her, but my aunt beat her to it. You had a family, she said to Mom, sharp as a knife. You had 2 children, but you made one disappear. Mom blinked. You erased her, my aunt continued. When she needed you, you turned away. And now that she doesn't need you, you come bearing cookies? No. No one replied. Zach shifted his weight, tried to speak, but Uncle Don cut him off. You tried to steal her house, he said simply. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. The last voice came from the hallway. My grandmother, small, barely heard all evening, said softly, I saw the lease. I saw the broken lock. And I saw the photos from all the years you left her out. She looked at me. You don't owe them forgiveness. I nodded once. That was it. No screaming, no storming out. Just silence so thick it swallowed the room. The perfect ending. Mom stepped back first. She left the cookies on my counter. Madison wiped her face and followed. Zach didn't look up once. Dad lingered. He opened the door last. Merry Christmas, he said, but it didn't sound like he meant it. We didn't answer. They didn't try to come back inside after that. The door closed. The music resumed, soft and hesitant at first, like the room had to remember how to be warm again. Someone turned Ray Charles back on. The lights flickered as the heater kicked in. No one mentioned what had just happened. We passed plates, refolded napkins. My friend Sarah poured wine for the table like we hadn't just watched a family implode. Later, I stepped outside with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The yard was quiet. A few guests had claimed sleeping bags in the camper, curious to see how I'd once lived. It reminds me of being a kid again, one cousin said. He meant it kindly. I stayed on the porch for a while, letting the cold hit my face. They had come into my house with smiles, acting like they hadn't tried to steal it. They left with cookies and pity parties, and not one of them said they were sorry. Maybe they never would. That was the thing about people like them. They didn't believe in consequences, only inconveniences. And being told no was always the worst kind. Inside, someone laughed. I heard the sound of forks on plates, of people sneaking second helpings of dessert. The kind of normal, happy noise I'd never heard in my parents' house unless Zach was being celebrated. I didn't go back in right away. I just stood on my porch, held the blanket tight, and said it quietly out loud to no one. I was always there. They just didn't see me. Christmas morning came quiet. The house still smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Someone had already started a second pot. I stepped over folded blankets, empty wine glasses, and a half-finished plate of pie, the kind of mess that meant people felt safe here. Outside, frost glazed my truck. The camper sat just beyond the fence line, pale in the winter light. A cousin had slept out there and left the curtain half open. I could see a folded quilt on the bench seat, neat and respectful. I walked around to the side yard and ran my hand. Across the aluminum siding, the same camper I'd once cried inside, teeth clenched, whispering that I would never beg again. I didn't. I passed the spot where Zach had parked his moving truck. The grass was still dead in the shape of its tires. A single zip tie lay in the dirt, probably from one of the boxes he'd never unpacked. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. Just a plan that failed. Before going back inside, I paused at the porch. The front light was still on. I hadn't turned it off the night before. They said I didn't have a family. But last night, 10 people stayed in my home, shared food, washed dishes, and told old stories. No one cried in the hallway. No one threw anything. No one asked me to leave. I stood at the door, then reached up and flipped the porch light off. No need to leave it on for anyone anymore.